Loki, the Norse god of mischief, once took the form of a mare and returned not as he left, but with blood trailing beneath him and a miraculous foal at his side. Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse destined to become the greatest steed in all the 9 realms. The gods rejoiced, no one questioned the blurring of divine lines. Their deities shifted from male to female as effortlessly as slipping on a new cloak. What exalted gods would destroy mortals? In longhouses filled with smoke and flickering firelight, bards recited tales of Odin himself, donning women's robes to master feminine magic, and those gathered would nod solemnly in reverence. Yet those same people would exile or kill a man for mirroring such divine flexibility. The Norse didn't coin a word for male same-sex relationships out of ignorance but strategy. Silence served power. By never naming such unions, society denied them protection. The law didn't criminalize the act, it punished the role. I hope everyone helps me with a like and a subscription, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. To be passive to receive stripped a man of his masculinity reduced his social standing to dust. Every intimate encounter between men became a contest of status. One retained power, the other surrendered it. And that loss was permanent. Language carved out categories, arger, ergi, swordin, all meant the same thing, a man who had been used no longer a full man. These labels weren't inconsistencies, but tools. What enhanced a god degraded a mortal. Loki could shapeshift and birth a foal and be honored. A man doing the same became a warning. The gods could bend rules. Humans were bound by them. Authority defined meaning. Position dictated consequence. As Sleipnir flew across the northern skies bearing messages between worlds, mortal men learned to walk carefully, ensuring every step confirmed their unbroken masculinity. If you find these ancient paradoxes gripping, consider subscribing to this channel as we unearth how echoes of these systems still shape modern masculinity. In the village square, a rune stone stood like an accusing finger pointed at the heavens. Its surface bore a single freshly carved word, arga. No wound burned deeper. To be labelled as sexually passive was to be marked for social annihilation. In Viking society, honour was a fortress made of reputation. Raids fortified it, harvests strengthened it, but submission shattered it. Icelandic law such as the Gragas texts codified this. A man called Sordin, sexually used, could challenge his accuser to a duel, not could must. Bloodshed or death were the only resolutions. Denial wasn't enough. Proof wasn't needed. The insult was the evidence. A conqueror in war who violated male captives was celebrated, his dominance reaffirmed. But the violated bore the shame through their bodies, their identities rewritten. Words like nisdragra and blauder, disgrace, cowardice, weakness circled around one, fear that masculinity was fragile and could be lost. Men policed themselves relentlessly. They avoided softness, eye contact, even friendliness, lest they be suspected of slipping into receptivity. Inside great halls during long winter nights, every gesture was calculated. Men sat with gaps between them. They shared ale, but never kindness. They laughed only when it displayed dominance. The laws were written in stone, but daily life was the true enforcer. Even a baseless accusation could silence a man. His voice diminished, his presence tolerated, never welcomed. He moved through his world like a ghost, and the rune stone, cold grey, unforgiving, stood to remind all of how little it took to lose everything. It bore the name of a man still alive, still working, still breathing. But socially he was gone. The frost made the letters harder to read, but impossible to forget. The stone would outlast him, so would the system. Honour demanded constant maintenance through exclusion, suspicion, and the looming threat of erasure. The accused man now sat cross-legged in the dirt outside the assembly hall. His back was straight despite days without sleep. His hands rested just so, neither defiant nor submissive. Every movement a negotiation for survival. One had seen the act. No physical proof existed. None was needed. Words like blades were real. As the sun crept over the roofs, shadows stretched across the settlement. The man remained still. Villagers passed without a glance, shielding themselves from the social stain. Children were pulled away when they wandered too near learning the lesson before they had words for it. His accuser had cast the word "swordin" like a spear, and it had landed. It didn't need to be true. It only needed to be spoken. Raid. The word struck deeper than any sword, for it didn't just wound, it rewrote identity. Once whispered by enough voices, belief hardened into truth no matter its origins. Under the Gragas law, to attack a man's masculine honor with words was considered more damaging than breaking his bones. Bones could heal, a fractured reputation never fully mended. The law acknowledged this brutal reality by permitting revenge killings in response. But the system ensured revenge was often unreachable. The accused, already stripped of standing by the very insult, found himself trapped. To fight back, he needed the same masculine credibility that had already been taken from him, and so he sat exiled in spirit, if not in body, as life flowed around him. At the village well, women lowered their voices as they spotted him. Traders bartered loudly their exaggerated normalcy, a signal we don't see him. His wife hadn't spoken to him since the accusation, not because she believed it, but because survival required silence. To be seen beside him was to risk her own social collapse. The community turned its back while keeping him in view, neither cast out nor embraced. He had become a living warning, trapped between existence and erasure. Legally, he could challenge his accuser. Realistically, he couldn't. Who would witness a duel where the accused stood already dishonored? Victory would mean nothing. Defeat would confirm everything. The gods whose stories told of gender shifts and divine transformation remained silent. Their tales belonged to another realm untouched by human suffering. Sacred myth and secular law shared no common ground. The legal process had closed. The social punishment would last forever. He still breathed, still stood, but he no longer lived as the man he once was. Far away on a Viking longship, slick with seawater and blood, another ritual played out. Raiders had stormed a coastal village, stripped it of wealth, and now gathered for the true conquest, not gold, but humiliation. In the ship's center knelt the village chieftain, once a symbol of law and order. Now naked beneath the salt spray, his cloak discarded like a broken crown, he was no longer a leader. He was a message. This wasn't aimless brutality, it was strategic. Viking raids served dual purposes, acquiring wealth and dismantling enemies through psychological warfare. The chieftain's public degradation wasn't an afterthought, it was the main event. His high status made his fall more potent. To break him was to fracture the very idea of leadership. The surrounding raiders weren't just participants, they were students. This was a demonstration of how to unmake a man. Rope burns wrapped his wrists not to hold him, but to position him, to force the posture that would most clearly signal his downfall. The body itself became a canvas for conquest. The raiding captain oversaw the scene like a craftsman evaluating the edge of a blade. For him, sexual violence wasn't about desire, it was about effectiveness. Another tool of domination wielded with precision. The cold wind screamed across the sea as the act unfolded. The chieftain gasped, each breath visible in the chill, each tremor noted by his captors as a measure of their success. He was no longer a person in their eyes. He was a vessel of failure, a lesson etched in flesh. His people watched in silence, bound by ropes or fear, learning what awaited those who resisted. The message was clear. Viking dominance extended beyond the battlefield into the soul. As the humiliation ended, the raiders spoke in practical tones, comparing techniques like craftsmen, swapping notes. Sexual violence was a form of technology refined, calculated, and devastating. The chieftain's stare had gone blank, not vacant by chance, but by design. His captors had succeeded in stripping him of self. He would return not as a man, but as a warning. As the ship turned toward home, its sails full of wind and its deck haunted by silence, it carried no prisoners, only lessons, and one hollowed-out shell of authority now rebranded as proof of Viking supremacy. Carrying both silver and survivors, the Viking ship sailed home heavy not just with plunder, but with people transformed into symbols. These broken villagers, stripped of dignity and will, would return to their homelands as living trophies, silent heralds of Viking supremacy. They needed no proclamations. Their bent posture, downcast eyes, and uneasy silence would speak volumes about the price of resistance. The brilliance of the system lay in its ability to replicate itself. Every act of sexual domination served not only the short-term gratification of the raiders, but the long-term psychological submission of entire populations. These men, hollowed out by humiliation, would haunt their villages as warnings. No divine intervention would restore what the chieftain had lost. Neither the old gods nor ancestral spirits offered a path back from this kind of ruin. His collapse was engineered to be permanent. Even when he returned to his village, tried to stand as leader, once more his own people would read his defeat in every gesture, his hesitant voice, his lowered gaze, his shame that needed no explanation. The Vikings had achieved something far more lasting than pillage. They had forged doctrine from destruction. As the sails vanished over the horizon, they left behind a legacy embedded in human bodies. What had begun as a raid ended as philosophy. The gods had long modelled boundary crossing without consequence. But those divine rules didn't apply to men. Odin once knelt in spoke-swirled ritual robed in the attire of women, his fingers sketching ancient symbols into earth as his voice wove the patterns of Seda. No man dared challenge him. His gender fluidity, his embrace of feminine-coded magic elevated his power, because gods existed above law, above consequence. Their transformations were celebrated, not punished. Odin's robes signaled wisdom. For a mortal man, the same clothing would mark him as ergi, unmanly, dishonoured. The line wasn't drawn between acts, but between beings. When Odin surrendered to the forces required by Sidra, receptivity, intuition, fluidity, he demonstrated mastery. A mortal performing the same act would be destroyed. That was the design. Power turned taboo into authority. What shattered a man could strengthen a god. This wasn't contradiction, it was control. Divine privilege set boundaries that mortals were forbidden to cross. The boundary didn't need guards, it needed examples. A farmer caught practicing cedar was exiled. A king consulting a seer was praised. The difference position, not deed. Authority only flowed down, never sideways, never up. Odin's ritual space, rich with the scent of herbs, was safe terrain. His transformation was a choice, a temporary state. When it ended, he returned to masculine form, untouched, undiminished. Mortal men attempting similar crossings never returned. The system channeled human yearning into myth, never into reality. Worship was permitted, imitation was punished. Men could marvel at divine fluidity, but were taught to fear the human version of the same. Odin's kneeling his surrender would have made any other man a target. But for a god it meant power. The gesture was identical. The interpretation depended entirely on who performed it. Authority defined meaning. Context shaped outcome. One body knelt and was honoured. Another knelt and was erased. There was no bridge between divine freedom and mortal restriction. The gods weren't aspirational figures. They were walls. They showed what was possible only to deny its access. Their freedom underlined human bondage. Their transformations confirmed mortal limitations. The scent of incense faded. But the boundary they marked endured. Gods crossed it at will. Men were destroyed just for approaching. Even after the Viking gods fell beneath the rising tide of Christianity, the obsession with masculine honour remained. Royal conversions brought crucifixes, bishops and scripture. But the core fears endured, merely translated. Where once runes named Arga, the church now whispered sodomite. Where ergi once lived, abomination now breathed. The vocabulary evolved, but the logic stayed intact. Christianity didn't replace the Viking control of male identity, it refined it. The new faith offered the same obsessions sheathed in gentler language. Norse blood feuds gave way to Christian confession. Public execution was replaced by eternal damnation, but the mechanism was unchanged. Men were measured, judged, and categorized by their distance from masculine dominance. Sunlight cut through stained glass, illuminating the kneeling figure of another accused. The setting had changed stone floors, vaulted ceilings, but the posture remained. His body, once examined for signs of social shame, was now scanned for violations of divine law. His crime was no longer against community honor alone, but against the cosmos itself. The punishment promised not just exile, but hellfire. The system had upgraded. Its tools were more polished, its language more surgical, but the fear remained the same. Nid became unnatural. With every passing generation, new words replaced old ones, but each carried fewer avenues of resistance. Under Viking law, an accused man could at least meet his accuser with a blade. Under Christian rule, he could only kneel, confess, and accept purification through pain. The whip continued its rhythm, cracking across exposed skin while monks observed in mandated silence. This was not called torture, it was called correction. The body was being taught lessons the soul had failed to grasp. The scars would become permanent reminders not just of wrongdoing, but of the body's inescapable potential for sin and the soul's dependency on discipline. Christianity's great innovation was this, the democratization of condemnation. Where Viking law focused shame on the passive partner, Christian doctrine cast its net over both participants. No longer a hierarchy, now universal guilt. Every man was watched, every behavior monitored, every deviation, no matter how small, was suspect. As the monastery bells tolled the passing hours, the lash sang its own chorus, sanctifying time through suffering. The pain was no longer personal, it had been elevated to a moral event. His body became the battleground where divine order fought back against human corruption. The logic hadn't changed, only the script. To receive, to yield, to soften, these still violated the essence of manhood. But now such violations meant more than social ruin. They carried the threat of spiritual contamination, a rot that could spread from one man into an entire community. Unless, of course, it was properly exposed, punished, and contained. Hot wax dripped from the altar candles, pooling and hardening on the cold stone floor. The victim's blood traced similar paths, thickening as the lesson progressed. His wounds would be bandaged, the blood washed away, but the instruction that would remain. Where Viking law demanded personal accusation and public combat, Christian law refined the process. It removed the need for duels, replacing them with confession extracted through institutional pressure. The church could name sins. Viking law dared not speak, then compel men to admit them. The scent of incense now mingled with iron and sweat. The correction ended. The man was released, not absolved, to tend his wounds and reflect on how agony had become the path to redemption. He had been reclassified not merely as shamed, but as evil. The transformation was not just physical, it was semantic. Sin meant something different than dishonor. Shame was a matter of public standing. Sin was a matter of eternal judgment. The reach of the system had expanded from clan to cosmos, from exile to hell. As the monastery resumed its ordered stillness and afternoon prayers began, the correction was done, but the scars endured, in muscle, in memory. The behavior stayed the same. So did the fear, so did the control, only the scripture changed. Same submission, different book, the bells kept ringing, the system kept turning, and men's bodies again paid the cost of a masculine ideal, restructured by religion but untouched in purpose. Authority had simply changed language. The machinery of control had found new fuel, but the results remained fixed. Centuries rolled on. The gods who once punished deviation became forgotten myths. The crosses that once justified suffering became decoration. But the framework, the architecture, survived. Not in temples, not in churches, but in laws, schools, diagnoses, jokes. In the quiet, everyday spaces where men are told to always be strong, to never receive, to never break. The whips and rune stones are gone, but the system doesn't need them anymore. It's built into habit. In Viking longhouses, men avoided eye contact. In Christian cloisters, they did the same. New words, same postures. Different theology, same fear. Every system renamed the target. None let it go. Stone tablets became scrolls, scrolls became legal codes became psychological manuals which now feed the algorithms of digital life. The language evolved. The medium shifted. But the message, the rule remained. The male body that yielded, that softened, that failed to dominate still haunts our history. A shadow no light seems able to dissolve. The Viking words arg, ergi, have faded into academic margins, but the expectations they enforced remain, still unnamed, still powerful, still waiting to be broken. Christian terms like sodomy and abomination ruled legal discourse for centuries, defining what could and could not be tolerated. When modern psychology replaced religion as the dominant interpreter of human behavior, it introduced new terms: pathology, disorder, deviance. But the shift was cosmetic. The underlying structure remained untouched. Every era found a new vocabulary to mark the same deviation from the masculine ideal. The consistency was not coincidence, it was design. Societies needed tools to define, enforce, and punish the boundaries of gender. And time after time, the passive male body was selected as the proving ground. Across pagan rites, Christian dogma, Enlightenment science, and modern clinical frameworks, the target remained stable. Contemporary slurs echo medieval insults which trace back to ancient accusations whispered in firelit halls. The shame passed from generation to generation, not just as belief but as muscle memory. The body was never permitted to speak for itself. It was read, judged, labelled by priests, doctors, lawmakers, and peers. Interpretation always came from outside. Meaning was dictated by authority. The subject, the human, was reduced to an object. What connected these eras wasn't ideology, it was repetition. Most people couldn't explain why certain gestures, tones, or behaviors triggered shame. They didn't need to. They learnt the rules by watching how others were punished. Understanding was optional, obedience was enough. Today, legal protections coexist with ancient fears. Anti-discrimination laws sit beside playground taunts. Progressive rhetoric is recited in classrooms and violated in locker rooms. The system has evolved only in language. It performs tolerance in public, enforces boundaries in private. Its mechanisms are subtle, now embedded in instinct and habit. a gesture too soft, a voice that breaks in the wrong place, a posture that seems too yielding. These aren't crimes, they're cues. And once seen, they activate reactions so practiced they no longer feel like choices. No one needs to say why. Everyone knows what comes next. This is not history. This is infrastructure. Ancient, persistent, adaptive. It doesn't need belief. It needs only silence from those who understand it and unconscious participation from those who don't. The gods who crossed boundaries remain frozen in myth. The men who try today remain at risk. The gap between divine freedom and human punishment hasn't closed. It's been reinforced. Today's bodies carry today's scars, but they're born of machinery older than the religions that once gave it voice. Older than law, older than the states that claim moral progress. The thread was never severed. It was buried deeper. It runs through office meetings and schoolyard dares, awkward dinners, and dating apps through legislation and viral videos. The same machine doing the same work. The vocabulary has changed. The violence has not. And still it runs. The same system, the same silence, the same suffering. History isn't behind us, it's under us, inside us. It is now, and it is still working. Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.